We're going to talk about leadership today, and you've got me until, technically until 10, I think. Whoa. So, a couple ground rules as we talk about this stuff. One is, most of all, this is one perspective on leadership, okay? This happens to be mine. You've seen a library of leaders. That was intentional this week. Different genders, different ethnicities, different perspectives. It's your responsibility, you're morally culpable for picking and choosing among those things that fit you. Not to build something because it's about you, but to build something that fits who you are and how you're made. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But I do want to be very careful to say, this is what's worked for me. And it's one point of reference in your library. You may disagree with 90% of what I say, or even 100%. That's okay. But what I want to encourage you to do is think about leadership with intentionality. You need to have a theology of leadership. And you may not think of yourself as a leader, but I'm going to challenge you and say we're all leaders for scriptural reasons today. And go through that. So the takeaway from today then is, how do I think about leadership? How do I exercise leadership in all that I do, professionally and personally? Because there is no separation in leadership, because to me, leadership, I'll give the secret away before I even start. Leadership to me is the external manifestation of an internally disciplined life. And I think that's excellence. And I think excellence attracts. And people are going to be attracted to your excellence. And they're going to be attracted to what they see in you because you bear testimony to the hope within. Because you're called to be excellent. We live in a world of mediocrity. And Christians too often tolerate mediocrity in the name of grace. You're called to be excellent, so what is it about your excellence? And when people are attracted to you, what is your responsibility as you engage them? And as you engage them, that's leadership. Okay. The last thing I would say in terms of ground rules is feel free to interrupt me. If you're not buying it, hey, Seiple, I'm not buying it. We've got some time together. We don't have to use all this time. But we can do a Q&A as we go, because in some ways this is the most important thing, is that we have a discussion with ourselves. An internal monologue, as Austin Powers might say. So let's think about this stuff. The other thing about leadership is, as evangelicals, I would say, maybe as Americans as well, there seems to be this continuum of how we think about it. And I want to think about it the right way. On the one hand, leadership is not a Christian thing. I've had conversations with people about this, generally from the pacifist camp of evangelicalism and Christianity. But where I used to teach this course, and this, by the way, this is a semester course reduced to about an hour. I'm not going to talk as fast as Bob Roberts, but I hope that's on tape. And Bob, I hope you're watching this sometime later. We love you, Bob. What about Bob? But where I used to teach this course, there was this feeling that, well, leadership is not a Christian thing because we can't be involved in those kinds of things. And the comment that was made to me at the time was, why do we need so many chiefs? Why can't we be a whole bunch of Indians doing things? And that's something to think about. My response to that is that's ridiculous. To use a theological phrase, I don't care if you're a bunch of type B tree huggers and you're totally focused on community consensus, blah, blah, blah. Somebody's going to say, let's go hug the tree. That's leadership, and it's usually going to be the person who commands the most respect in the group because they're thinking about their internal life. And so even type B tree huggers who rush to sit at the back of the room and don't want to be in the public light, they can be leaders, and they are leaders, whether you like it or not. Now, on the other extreme, we've got this total fascination among evangelicals and conferences. Just flip through the pages of Christianity Today and look at these conferences with all these leaders with their airbrushed pictures. You know, or there's... For freak's sake, you got to be a leader. You got to be a leader. You got to come to our leadership conference. Come to our leadership summit. I've been to leadership summits where leadership was never even defined. Who's this about? The people you're leading or yourself? That's ridiculous too. In fact, I would use a stronger word for it than the tree huggers. It's idolatry. Because it is about ourselves. It's about how we can do these things. And as Bob said yesterday, you can build a church that's pretty darn good without God. And so leadership for me has to begin in the Scriptures, as that Argentine pastor reminded us through Jose. Where'd you find that PowerPoint in the Scriptures? Point to me the verse. That's the way I think about these things. So we're going to begin with devotions and Scripture, and then my basic outline, allowing for interruptions and refutations and reprimands and rebukes, is why leadership now? What is the definition of leadership? What are the 3 no's to a yes? K-N-O-W, in terms of how you hear a call. And then what is the business of leadership? And so what I'm trying to do, again, is present a comprehensive, intentional thought process for a theology of leadership. And again, the only takeaway I want you to have is I should have something similar. Not in terms of what was said, but in terms of a comprehensive approach to it. So I've asked John, or Ted, to read John 6. If we could open our Bibles there and read along or close your eyes and listen to John. Thanks, Ted. 3 points that I want you to take away from this. And I think I'm still a registered Presbyterian, they're alliterative. Prayer, power, people. It's a cycle that goes through this. Jesus starts out in the mountaintop, comes down into the valley of reality where there's challenges and opportunities. And because he's in a right relationship with God vertically, he's able to serve horizontally, the culture of the cross. And then the answer comes from the people. And it's a multiplying effect. And then he goes back into the cycle and begins to pray again. It's an amazing example, I think, of what leadership is. Now, the converse of that through the human lens is also interesting to watch. The disciples come down off the mountain, get overwhelmed, fail the test that Jesus creates for them, and are completely irrelevant. So they're in touch with God, they come down, they don't remember what they were praying about or doing, and so they're irrelevant. God's irrelevant to them, and therefore they're irrelevant to society. That's the short version. So let's kind of walk through some of that stuff. They're up on the mountain and they're praying. He's with the disciples and they're on a mountainside, which is to say they've made time to talk. Now, I don't know if Jesus is explaining like he does in Luke 4, like how all the Old Testament has predicted him, and predicted his coming. God is the God of history, and there's just this exegetical analysis going on. He obviously does that. In John 5, he talks about, hey, Moses wrote about me. And he says it in the other Gospels. It could be that they were just hanging out, shooting the breeze. I don't know what it is, but they're together. They're together. And when you spend time together joking and smoking, but maybe not smoking, but joking around and hanging out and talking about life, relationships are built. That's it. But the thing is, you've got to be intentional about creating the space for relationships to be built. You have to be intentional about creating a space like this for 3 days. We are all busy. We can tell you all the stuff we're doing for God, right? But hopefully these times away help us to realize if all those things we're doing for God, we're actually doing with God. Because we're building these relationships with each other, relationships of accountability, which we'll return to, relationships that keep us focused on Him, being in a right relationship with Him. It's absolutely critical. So are you making the time to do those things? Are you making the time to have the spiritual disciplines? Are you committing the great omission by not having time to pray? I can't tell you how many times I fail in this. It's so easy to start the day with prayer and Psalms. And it's so easy to take a shower and start thinking, this. I don't know about you, that's my daily occurrence. And then like next thing you know, it's meetings are starting, and maybe you're throwing up a half-hearted prayer before you go into something like a three-point lob from half court. Kind of like Stanford versus UCLA, the Pac-10, if anybody saw that. That was painful to watch. But, yeah. It's hard to take seriously a school that has baby blue for its colors, but then again, it's hard to take seriously a school that has its mascot as a color itself. At least you guys are the Bears, the Bruins. We're the Cardinal. Talk about PC, not going to offend anybody. We're not even a bird, we're the Cardinal, singular. All right. But you don't need to know about the troubles I had at college. Trying to be macho. And a leader, right? So these are the things that happen up on the mountainside. And then you come down into the valley of life, challenges and opportunities, the valley of where it sucks to be you sometimes. I mean, it's just you can't get around that. There's suffering in life. Our suffering is a little bit different than some of the suffering we know from around the world. But on the other hand, I wouldn't say there's physical and there's psychological. It could be a woman abused by her husband. It could be psychological abuse from a boss or a peer. These things are out there, and they're real. And we don't know why they happened, but I do think that if we're in right relationship with God, God gives us the privilege of suffering with him because he shares the same pain. We don't like to understand that sometimes because we're self-dependent, as Ruth pointed out sometimes. And so suffering is a chance, if nothing else, to get closer to God. And that's what challenges are. You're forced into faith. I can tell you all the ways all the things I need at our little organization. You know, we're 7 people and we got 10 different fingers in the dike and we got about 8 toes and need this money, need this staffing. Bob, I can just hear the Lord going, yada, yada, yada. Are you focused on me? Do you know that I'm going to provide for you? So you come down in the valley where it sucks to be you, and there's this challenge. There's 5,000 people. They're suffering. They don't have food. We heard the other night 40,000 kids dying a night. I think that number's down to 33,000 a day these days because of all the impact of the international community. Still 33,000 people. Catherine gave us a great talk yesterday about the marginalized. I mean, the suffering's out there. What are you going to do about it? Now, what's interesting here is that Jesus creates the teachable moment. He did this to test them. Are you really listening to me? It's like, you know, Jesus, when he comes back after the resurrection, he's talking to Peter on the beach. I mean, it's almost, if you don't know better, it's almost condescending. But if you know Peter, you know the guy needs it. Jesus, Peter, do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me? Then feed my sheep. Feed my sheep. You got to be on the mountain to feed the sheep. You got to equip them. You got to equip them to be disciples. That's what mountainside experiences are like. That's what spiritual highs are like. And then you get into reality. Do you really believe it? Do you really depend on me? Do you trust me? Do you know that I'm there with you? Do you know that I'm suffering with you? Or are you going to throw out that spiritual high that you had at Wycliffe at the first challenge you get when you get up off that airplane back home and say, oh man, it sucks to be me. And what do I got to do? And I'm going to stress out about this, and I'm going to have a migraine, and these experiences are going to bleed over into my family and my colleagues, and I'm going to annoy them and be just a loser to be around. I mean, we've all done these things more than we care to admit. So when these things come, be thinking about this. Be thinking about this. Do you trust me? Do you love me? You can feed people's sheep by how you respond to this, by the way. How do you respond to these challenges? And so Jesus is there. He's in right relationship with the Lord, and he has the power to do things. He knows that. But apparently his disciples are not. And what is their reaction? It's very human, right? It's very logical. 8 months' wages. That's a lot of money, especially in those times in a rural subsistence economy. 8 months' wages. And then, one guy puckers up. You could just see him saying, Jesus said something on the mountain. So it's 8 months' wage, but what is, and then the loaves come in, but what is that among so many? I'm willing to lean on you a little bit, Lord, but come on, let's face facts. Let's deal with this reality. I call this the Philip finite factor. I'm a big fan of alliteration. But Philip is he's asking the logical question. And we ask these same questions in our own lives. You're supposed to. Stewardship in some ways is strategy. Is this the best way to allocate our resources? But in asking that question, he walks right into Jesus' trap almost. Because what he's doing is he's insulting the sovereign Lord. Genesis 18:14. Is anything too great for me, too hard for me? I am the Lord your God. It's as simple as that, really, but we want to make it complex. So Philip is out there and asking these questions, and you just think about what we're doing in our own lives in the name of strategy and all these kinds of things. And if you're in the fundraising business, you encounter a whole bunch of donors who are trying to be strategic and steward their goods. And, we've reached the point in our culture in some places where in the name of stewardship, we've eliminated a place for faith. We've eliminated a role for God. Try telling that to a donor. It doesn't get you very far. But sometimes that has to be said. Stewardship and strategy, at the end of the day, we'll come back to this. You're required to do it as a function of, but it only shortens the step of faith. Faith is still required. And that's what Jesus is saying. You want the power? I put you in touch with the power in the mountainside. Now you're in real life. Do you have the faith to claim that power this day? So what does Jesus say to his motley crew of allegedly discipled disciples who can't remember what it means? He basically says, step aside. That's a loose translation. That's in the Eugene Peterson translation. No, it's not. But step aside, let me show you how it's done. Don't you remember? Sometimes I'd love to write a book on the humor of Jesus because, oh, ye of little faith. Please, don't you get it? How many times do I have to say this to you? How many times? Now, what's interesting is in claiming the power of the Lord, because he's in the right relationship, power of God, the maker of the universe, the great I am, where do angels come from on high and the heavens open up? It comes from the people. The people made in his image. And who are those people? They're the church. They're the church. Now, there's a lot of things. I want all these critiques to come in about this school and everything. And I want you to be thinking about your own lives. But you know where the answers are going to come from all the things that we've been talking about? Look to your left and right. Ugh. Yeah, it's people like you. You're the ones who are going to be figuring this out. Solution sets are going to come from what you take away from this and what you decide to do with it in prayerful relationship with your God and Maker. You're the body of Christ. You're the church. You're called to live out this example of prayer, power, and people. And you know what? If you do it, the miracle begins to multiply. How do 5 loaves and 2 fish go so far? It's impossible. But one person talks to another, one light in the darkness lights another light. It gets bigger. It gets brighter. It's so easy. But we don't do it. And then what's the final thing that happens as the people respond? People are people. We're fallen. We're sinful. Oh man, this guy's cool. He can do miracles. Let's make him king. And Jesus says, that's not what my power is about. That's not what my leadership is about. Now, there's nothing wrong with being a king. Christians are called to politics. That's a whole different field. But that's not what Jesus was called to. And so what's Jesus' response to that? Because he gets tempted, you know. Satan holds him up and says, oh, this can be yours. If you want it to be, just bow down to me. He goes away. And it's interesting to me, he goes back to prayer. And it's interesting to me that he says he goes back alone. You know, if I'm Jesus, I'm fired up about this example that's just happened. I'm praising God for the glory the opportunity to exercise God's glory and demonstrate it. But he's got to be a little bummed out. I think he's going back and he's praying for his disciples again. You know, how many times, Lord? It's like, won't you take this cup from me? Then he asks again. But no, he's not. He's going to be patient. He's going to have stamina. He's going to have strength. He's going to engage. And he's not going to turn back, as Bob Creason pointed out in his thoughts on Esther. Steadfastly toward Jerusalem. Psalm 105:4, seek his face. That's an imperative. That's a command. So the challenge today, and we all fail at it, especially me, is to be in touch with God through prayer. Make the time for those kinds of things. Be intentional about it. It's amazing. The more you make time for that, the easier life gets. That's been my experience, at least. And then when you get into the valley of real life, don't see everything as a function of your portfolio or your business card that we all love to have in exchange. Yeah, let's do lunch. Every single thing that comes your way is a dare from God to demonstrate the love of Christ unconditionally. It's a dare. Are you going to demonstrate it? It doesn't matter what you do. Are you going to show the love of Christ this day? That's what he's saying. No challenge is too great for me, but here's a chance for you to be obedient, Esther. So think about these things, and as you do so, I think, and as you try to practice them, I think you become more relevant. You become more relevant. You take God seriously, you're going to be relevant as an individual because solution sets are going to be provided. And then you're going to be relevant to society, and then it's going to start multiplying. This is exactly what Bob Roberts was talking about and how the church works. That's the way it was designed to be. Prayer, power, people, back to prayer. Okay, thus concludes the devotion. So please allow myself to introduce myself again. Let's talk about leadership and how some of this stuff relates. Why is leadership important? I briefly referred to this in the opening remarks. Sorry, Bob, I'm keeping this close to my face. But I want you to go back to my definition of globalization. Whether you agree with it or not the definition, the impact of globalization. I really like Paul's definition, by the way, the other day, where we're increasingly moving towards one social unit. Star Trek is coming soon. But I think that's happening. And whether it's increased interconnectedness or whatever your definition is, the impact is still the siege on identity, right? The siege on identity. And so the question becomes, who is going to fill this psychological and spiritual vacuum that results? People are looking for meaning. Who's going to provide meaning? Now, this is not some kind of abstract question and how many angels fit on the head of a pin thing. This is the real deal. Remember the quote about the Rwandan genocide? The grave is half full. Who will help us fill it? There was meaning derived from that. Purpose was derived from that. In the absence of good, there was evil. It's that simple. People will step in, according to their fallen nature, people will step into this global psychological, spiritual dislocation and fill that void with meaning. Kosovo just declared its independence. That whole process started back in 1989 as communism was beginning to crumble in Eastern Europe. And it was Milosevic on the field of the Blackbirds, on the 600th anniversary of the Serb defeat at the hands of the Ottomans, which became this mythological complex about the Serbs as the guardians at the gate of Europe against the infidel. And he turned that into Kosovo, a land that is 90% Albanian and Muslim, was repressing the Christian Serb. All the wars of the Balkans, all the 1990s, because somebody stepped into the void. One guy made a difference, and it was evil and horrible. And as was referenced in the speech the other night, where was the church? Where was the church in Rwanda? Where were the Christian leaders in America? We actively argued against sending armored personnel carriers to Rwanda. And if you've ever heard the testimony of Roman Dallaire, the Canadian general, he thinks that just 5,000 people could have made a difference because one person or one country would stand up to it. People make a difference, folks, and you shouldn't be thinking, oh, that's not me, it can't be me, yada, yada. If it's not you, somebody from the other side will. So you can see these times as a total threat that overwhelms you and go, man, sucks to be me, sucks to be Christians, I got nothing to say. Or you can say, you know what, I've got to stand up, I've got to stand in the gap, I've got to be a part of the solution set. I don't know what that looks like, Lord, but I'm here, send me. And it might be engaging your local Muslim community. It might be a whole bunch of other things. You don't know. But until you're ready to say that, you're irrelevant. And I don't think there's any greater sin, by the way. So it's important. Leadership is important, and people of faith, Christians, the church, needs to step in and say there is a viable alternative to our times and demonstrate and live out the good news. We need to be people of the way. In our own culture, we have reduced the way to a belief in a creedal system. And you're in or you're out because he's the way, the truth, and life. But before it was any of those things and this ideology that we've created that Jesus speaks about against in Matthew 23, it was a behavior. That's why it's called the way. We got to get back to the behavior so we can reclaim our beliefs. So leadership is important, especially in these times. How would you define leadership? I'm going to give you a whole bunch of definitions. All of them are allegedly value neutral because I want you to be able to use them in your secular, pluralistic context. And I want to end with the definition that I think is best. But any of these work. Here's some thoughts. One, getting the job done with what you got. These aren't mellifluous things, by the way. This is my former Marine side coming out. Getting the job done with what you got. Don't make excuses. Don't whine. Don't tell me about the resources you don't have. I don't want to hear it. Get it done. Definition number 2, the continued performance of a group or organization in the leader's absence. If that group is good, has been well led, it'll run pretty well without the leader. If it goes to hell in a handbasket the first day the leader's gone, there's something wrong with the leadership style. Number 3, the ability to persuade a group to forego the present reality in the hope of a different future. Here's the current situation, but we can't continue in this. Here's the alternative reality that does not exist, but if we do not claim that reality, we're all in trouble. That's a tough one. It's much easier to create a reality, to create a new culture, than to change one. Here's another definition. The just, there's a value being inserted, the just exercise of influence. John Gardner calls it the process of persuasion. And then the one that I am attracted to, the external manifestation of a disciplined internal life. The external manifestation of a disciplined internal life. Whatever your definition is, I think you need to have one. Because if you don't have a definition, a point of reference, everything's leadership, nothing's leadership, and irrelevance looms. The thing to understand about leadership, at least in my own experience, is leadership is about power. Sometimes we shy away from that. It's like shying away from politics. We don't do politics. We don't do power. Leadership is about power. Power is relational. It's the ability to influence people or events subconsciously or consciously, directly or indirectly. It's always going on. Even among the group of type B tree huggers who are trying to decide to hug the tree. There's power relations. Somebody's going to step up and say, let's go. Attack the tree. But this thing, I want you to know, though, that power and leadership are scriptural. I mean, I hope you understand that power is scriptural, that it comes from Jesus. But, just to be super clear, Paul says this in discipling his own Timothy. For God did not give us a spirit of timidity, but a spirit of power, of love, and self-discipline. Power. You're not called to be wallflowers as you engage his world. As you find out what he's doing and you're trying to come alongside, God's not looking for timid people. He wants people that are humble and confident and claim his name and claim the promises of Jeremiah 29:11 through 14. Notice, though, that power is coupled with love and self-discipline. And remember that love also has the element of truth, Ephesians 4. We have to be able to speak the truth to each other. That's also a definition of friendship. Now, leadership is also scriptural. I just want to give you a couple verses here, just so you know I'm not making this up. And these are all from Paul, too. Romans, we have different gifts according to the grace given us. If it is leadership, govern diligently. This is Timothy. Here's 1 Timothy 3:1. Here's a trustworthy saying. If anyone sets his heart on being an overseer, he desires a noble task. The thing is not to lift up leadership as idolaters because you say the leader is more important. No, if you're taking yourself seriously, the leader becomes the servant. In the Marine Corps, we have a tradition. Well, it's actually a rule. If you violate it, you'll be hung. But and I was an infantry officer. In the field, when you're out there with your men and you get the luxury of the truck showing up with some hot chow, which is a miracle. It's when it happens after you've been in the field for a long time and it's rainy and it's wet and it sucks to be you. The officers eat last. It's that simple. And if the chow runs out because some lance corporal who doesn't know how to share yet, or some private takes a little more, guess what? You don't get any food. So servant leadership is the key. The last shall be first, the first shall be last. Leadership is not, being a leader means that you understand all the more just how unimportant you are in a visible sense. You are of equal importance with all the other parts of the body. So, how do we exercise this? How do we think about this? And now I want to just spend a little bit time on the internal life. Again, this is a whole semester reduced to, as Bob would say, I'm not going to camp out on any of these things, but Bob Roberts. But I do want to talk a little bit about the internal life and what the call is. How do you know that you're called? And this is my own thinking. I can't emphasize this enough. And these are not leadership books that I've read because I don't really read leadership books. When I put my course together, forgive me, I just thought about 90% of that stuff was crap. It was here's what I did, it's all good, and there's not a whole lot of scripture behind it, or the secular versions too. It's just the Reader's Digest thing. Leadership is serious stuff. And you got to get really scripturally grounded, and you got to be comfortable with power and not afraid to exercise it in that right relationship. So what does the internal life look like? How do you know that you're doing it kind of right? Joshua 1 through 9, it's really a humbling read. Most of us will claim the thing at the end. Claim every piece of land under which your foot treads, blah, blah. That's about us. But, if you take the time to read the previous 8 verses or whatever, it's interesting that Joshua is introduced here in the first book of his namesake. He's introduced as Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' assistant. This is not Joshua, son of Nun, former CEO of this and this, that, and XYZ. The guy's 90 years old, and he's been an executive assistant for a long time. You ever thought he wondered if he hit the glass ceiling? Where's my place? What's my career path? He was being obedient, serving Moses. And we know that this is true about his character because along with Caleb, they were the two spies when they came back from the land in Numbers 13. And Caleb's powerful word speaking for both of them. Here's the tangible evidence of the promises of God, these giant grapes and everything else. Let us go forth and take the land, for we surely can. Caleb's not into faith statements or touchy-feely theological kumbaya stuff. That's the promise. I felt it. You can see it. Let's go. So we know that Joshua is an obedient guy. And he's been obedient for a long time. Imagine walking around the desert for 40 years, 1 year for each day you spent in the land of promises, of tangible milk and honey that you brought back, knowing that you were right, and then suffering the corporate judgment. Wouldn't you want to have a little bit of animosity toward all your fellow Jews? Why did you say, yes, we don't have to be doing this? I'm not part of the problem. I mean, you can see all the ways. Joshua, do you know, I think, I've heard this, and if it's not true, it ought to be true. Joshua's the only guy in the Bible that nobody says anything bad about. That's a testimony. He has all kinds of reasons to complain and whine, but he never complains. He never whines. So he's introduced as the humble person he is. Here's the assistant to Moses. He's 90 years old, and now he's being called to, I spent 90 years preparing you, Joshua, for this time. If you had claimed it earlier because you knew it was coming, you're not the right guy for the job. And what is the emphasis as the land is given, again, at least to Joshua, who had been there before? And just think how happy he is as he goes in. He could be triumphal. He could say, see, I told you so. But he's not. And what does the Lord say to him toward the end of this passage? The book of the law shall not depart out of your mouth. You shall meditate it on it day and night, so that you may be careful to act in accordance with all that is written in it. Think before you do. Be in a right relationship with the Lord, then love people. If you don't know how to love, if you don't know how to have time on the mountainside, don't go into the valley of reality. It's that simple. It's very clear. Focus on me. Do you know that Jesus' message never changed throughout the Gospels? What was it? 2 words. Know me. Know me. His methodology changes to reach the audience, and we'll talk about that in a bit in terms of discernment. But it's know me. That's what Joshua is being told right now before he claims the 40-year-old promise that he's tasted before. Stick with me, meditate on me, and then act. So, that's easy to say, and this is an old book, and we've heard some of these things before, if not all of them before. So, how do you know what it means to be called? And there's lots of books on this, and some of them are good. But for me, it's very simple things, and I'm just sharing them with you as my experience. The 3 no's to a yes is what I call this. The 3 KNOWs, the 3 no's. And another way of saying is, how do you put yourself in a position to realize the call? First is know Him. That's my one theme for the entire week. Know Him, be in right relationship. Socrates, or Socrates, as some of us say, if you're a big fan of Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, I'm a connoisseur of shallowness. Socrates, with one of his students comes up to him, and I don't know the story exactly, and I'm sure some of you do, but he says, what does it mean to seek truth? And Socrates takes him all around the countryside, this, that, and the other, and the student's getting frustrated, and, what does it mean? Show me. And then he takes him out into the ocean and holds his head underwater. Thanks for that tough love. And when the guy comes up, and Socrates says this, When you seek truth the same way that you seek this air, then you'll know that you're finding it. Remember the first time you got dunked? A little kid in a pool? I have a very vivid imagination. Not imagination, memory. I was scared. Remember, anytime you've been diving deep or any of those kinds of things, I would hate to die by drowning. But when you break the water and you gasp air and you see the sun, man, life is good. That's the way you ought to think about Psalm 105:4. Seek his face. Seek the truth. Be in that relationship. David says, as a deer pants for water, as you swim toward the surface, yearning for oxygen. That ought to be your know him experience. You were made to glorify him. You weren't made to have a resume. You weren't made to do all these things, give conferences, speak. You're made to glorify him. But what do we do in our evangelical culture? And I'm so glad Ruth gave the devotions that she did. I'd love to say we planned it that way, but we clearly didn't. We get into this proof texting within verses. That's how bad we are. Let me give you some examples about this. Let me start with Bob's, not that Bob did this, Bob Creason and Esther. Esther 4:14. The Kairos moment. For such a time as this. How many times have you heard somebody say, with the best of intentions, don't get me wrong, but we take this to the max. For such a time as this, thank you, Lord, for this parking spot in the front of the mall so I can go take advantage of this sale. People pray that. I've heard people talk about that. For such a time as this. We got in our office one time, everything got into for such a time as this. This coffee was made for such a time as this. Thank you for that comment. It just, such a time. What does Mordecai say before, right before that? If not you, Esther, somebody else. Guess what? You're not important. You're important in God's eyes, don't get me wrong. But if not you, someone else. God is sovereign. He will do his will. If you've been obedient, if you spent your time on the mountainside, you're going to be in a position to be obedient and be used for great glory. How can we separate that verse into two, A and B? Well, just in case you thought that was an exception, let me give you another example. I mentioned it in the talk yesterday, yesterday, the Great Commission. Go into all the world, make disciples. We all talk about it all the time. Yeah, go team. But what does he say just before that? All things in earth and heaven are under my authority. I've got this one, guys. But I want you to do this. If you go out and make disciples without understanding that first part of the verse, it becomes about you, and disciples gets reduced to converts. And the last thing we need is another convert that's not discipled. And if you think I'm being blasphemous there, read Matthew 23:15. The only time Jesus really gets angry is with the religion of his day. Matthew 23:15, paraphrased, you cross hill and dale to make a convert, and you turn him into twice as much a son of hell as you are. That's pretty severe. That's Jesus, your Lord and King, talking. Be careful about reducing the Great Commission to converts, and realize that he's already there. One last example from the great evangelical culture known as America. Philippians 4:13. I can do all things through Christ. What is the previous verse? I've been hungry and I've been full, but I know what it is to be content. Content in him. And because I am content in him, I can do all things through Christ and serve as his hands and feet in this broken world, as his in-broken kingdom. But by golly, it's a Kairos moment. I need a convert, and I can do all things through Christ. We need to be content, and we need to make sure that what was said about Otto von Bismarck is not said about us. Bismarck had the great advantage and blessing of worshiping a God that always agreed with him. We need to understand what it means to be in right relationship and to seek his will. Otherwise, we are worshiping a God that agrees with us, which is to say, we are worshiping ourselves. Thank you very little. Okay, so that's the first no. Know him. If you don't get that, don't listen to anything else. Second part is know that he doesn't need you. He's God. That's one of the privileges of being the only deity in the entire universe. We don't know a lot about God. We think we do, and there's a lot revealed in the scriptures, but there's so much that we do not know. Jacob I loved, Esau I hated. We will never understand that. He will do what he wants in his way for his purposes. What does he say to Job when Job starts whining? Where were you when I hung the stars? Were you there? No. It's a tough thing to allow for these kinds of things. But here's the one lesson I've learned from my mom and pop is, well, many lessons, but this is the primary one. In a complex world where everybody has the answers, where everybody knows the absolute, absolutely, understand that you can't know the absolute, absolutely if you're a humble servant of Christ. And that means you put Jesus at the center and you let God draw the boundaries. If you draw the boundaries, if you know who's in and who's out and what's right and what's wrong all the time, I think you've just stopped worshiping a holy God. Let God draw the boundaries. Well, I know we're going to have differences about so many things, and they're all going to be rooted in Scripture to prove why we're right, the other person's wrong. Let's have those conversations. Let's agree to disagree agreeably. That's what Christians should be doing. But you know what? Jesus says he doesn't know when we don't know when he's coming back. Be cool with that. Comfortable with that. Get past your bad self and the need to have all the answers. Because as soon as you have all the answers, then I think you're irrelevant, because there's a lot of people in this world who are smart enough to know that they don't have the answers. And that's why they're seeking him if they don't even know who he is at this point amidst a global spiritual, psychological dislocation. Jesus heals the man at the pool, the invalid at the pool, on a Sabbath. He does it intentionally. Yeah, the guy gets healed, but you know why he did it? Because that begins it's the beginning of the end, and it leads to him being hung on a cross. He did it to annoy the Pharisees. That was the straw that broke the camel's back, that last healing on the Sabbath. It wasn't about that guy. We don't know what he's going to do. All of this to say is, if you know that he doesn't need you, but he longs for you to be by his side, allow for the return of mystery. Allow for the return of his majesty in what you do and how you do it. Now, if this sounds a little humbling, I think you're right. And it goes against the American experience, as Ruth so carefully delineated. The American experience is to celebrate Independence Day, right? Once a year. We all know the story. But if you're a follower of the way, you're celebrating Dependence Day every day. You're dependent upon him. You are nothing without him. You cannot know yourself unless you know him. And that's the third no. Know him. Know that he doesn't need you, but he longs for you to be by his side. And as a result, know yourself. You can't know yourself unless you know him. And as you know him and begin to know yourself, realize that the word ambition is not a dirty word. He's given you passions and skills to be utilized to fill that void out there. But ambition, like everything from God, can be used for good or evil. There is selfless ambition. There is selfish ambition. And the truth of the matter is we tend to hang out on the selfish side of the fence. But over time in discipleship and relationships of accountability, we can begin to be in the selfless side maybe 50% of the time. Bless you. And as you think about knowing yourself, I think it's important to get away from another American thing found in our Declaration of Independence. Ready for some blasphemy? We are not created equal. We are equal in His eyes. But we're not equal and we don't have the same gifts. It was intended that way. We would not have the wheel if we were all made like me. There's no chance. I'm allergic to math and science and technology. I don't get it. I never will. I'm comfortable with that. I'm up here speaking. Bob's back there running this whole thing. It doesn't happen without Bob. We are equal parts. Equal parts. In a horizontal relationship among each other. You could be the pinky, you could be the big finger, you could be the big toe. I don't know. But we're made equal in His sight, and under the American experience, and this is the positive side, theoretically we should all have equal opportunity before the law. But we're not made equal. So when you know yourself and you're thinking about a selfless ambition, what are those passions and skills that you have? I think a lot of times people say, well, I got to do this because my parents expect me to do this, or expect me to have this kind of job or this kind of salary, or, oh man, I'm so fired up for Jesus, I got to go someplace. I got to go to mission. You know, Bob talking the other day, he wanted to go to a missions conference. I got to go to seminary. I was speaking at Westminster Presbyterian last week or the week before, and I said, I don't even know where it came from. I said, you know, some of the people in this audience don't belong here. You got to get your butts out of seminary. Somebody came up to me afterwards. He said, thank you for liberating me. It wasn't me talking, because I've never said that before. And as soon as I said it, I thought, Seiple, don't. It's being taped. And I literally had no control over saying that. But be aware of your gifts and skills. And it's not an accident that you have them. And also be aware of your weaknesses. Now, we can't say that in evangelical circles, can we? Let's talk about our growth areas together, shall we? Come on. You're speaking the truth in love. Hey, there's an issue here. We need to talk about it. Be okay with that. If somebody says, you know, you offended me the way you said that, or if somebody comes up to me today after the speech and goes, hey, I really don't like how you said that. I will take it on board because I respect you, and I will think about it more than you care to me, because I'm a type A anal retentive American. I don't like criticism. But you have to discipline yourself to receive it. And if it's given constructively in love, it's more likely to be received. The Proverbs talk about this all the time. A rebuke from a wise man, woman, is a gift from God. Take it. And if you don't have a certain gift set, don't try and be something you're not. Okay. So if you do these three no's, I think you're in a position to answer the call. And it's not always going to be clear what the call is. But if you do these three things, I can tell you you'll be better positioned to hear it. And what is a call? You know, there's epiphanous moments, and people have these kinds of things. I'm not that smart or that in touch with God. What I have found in the call, and these are not my words, but my pastor's words from National Press, Craig Barnes, who's a wonderful man, he said this to me one time when I was asking him about it. And he said, realize this, if it's from God, there's no such thing as once in a lifetime. And it gets back to that evangelical American thing, isn't it? We really ought to take advantage of this opportunity because it'll never come by again. Well, who's that about? That's about you. You don't think God could use another Esther to do what you think is once in a lifetime for you? Think about that if it's from God, he's going to keep knocking. He doesn't want you to come work for him. He wants you to come work with him. So be ready to step through that door. And it just takes a while. Let me give you an example from my own experience about how this sometimes works. And because I felt like I did all the right Christian evangelical things. 3 years ago, I was given the opportunity to join the Bush administration and become the director of the Office of Foreign Disaster Assistance. I had written a book about NGOs in the military, how they engage the world, how they work together. It was really my first training in holistic thinking and how type A's and type B's come together. And I wrote a book about 4 case studies, Somalia, Rwanda. I mean, I knew this stuff. I knew everybody in the community because I'd interviewed them all. And I went, because I'm so anal about transparency, the first thing I did is I went and blubbered to each member of my board. Here's this opportunity. What do you think? I felt guilty for thinking, man, I'm attracted to that. I have all those passions and those skills. I know the military. I know the NGO world. And here's somebody saying, here's a $500 million budget where you can help somebody this day. That's cool. That call was pretty clear. That seemed like a once-in-a-lifetime thing to me. And I realized that, and I went back to Craig's words, and so I said, all right, start testing this thing. Do you know every single person on my board said, go for it, do it? And this is at a point, we haven't told any IGE stories today, but this is a point before all the, quote, success that we've had in Vietnam and Pakistan and some other places. And so I prayed about it. I'm talking to my wife. I'm talking to my family. I mean, I'm calling up brothers and sisters in the donor community. Are you okay with this? Would you still support? I mean, I'm doing everything right. And turns out that we had a conference in a foreign country, and I was just about to go, but before I went, I made the decision. Because he was waiting, and the guy who was asking was putting his political capital on the line with the White House. Because then you go through this vetting process and all this. And so I made the decision. I said, welcome aboard. I went over to him, I called him boss, and said, hey man, let's do this thing together. I'm totally excited. And I had this feeling in the back of my heart, like, I'm going to miss IGE, but, you know, life, there's seasons, and, you know, all those words we use. It's a seasonal change. So I went over to this country, and I was prepared to say goodbye to our partners. We always work through local partners, and there was a lot of cool things happening, but I realized that it was time. And before the conference started, I was in the bathroom, I'm shaving, and I'm not this mystical, charismatic guy who hears doves speaking, you know, words from God, and there it was in my head. Chris, you're not indispensable, but your time is not now. You know, I'm looking around, looking in the mirror, all I'm seeing is myself. And I said, all right. Let me think about that. And wouldn't you know, it was like, kind of like Groundhog Day in a way. I thought about it all day. I didn't say anything to anybody that day. That was my takeaway. And I'm back at the same spot, in the same mirror, shaving again the next day. And Eric Liddell comes into my head. And his line, when I run, I feel his pleasure. Do you all know that from Chariots of Fire? For those of you who don't know the movie, here's this son of Presbyterian missionaries who are working in the great country of China. His cousin or his sister Jenny is putting pressure on him to do the right Christian thing. And what's that? Go be a missionary? This is what you're called to do. And his response to that is, because he's a world-class runner, and he's been asked to join the Olympic team of the United Kingdom from Scotland. And his response to that is, I know, Jenny, but when I run, but God made me fast. I've got these passions, I've got these skills, and when I run, I feel his pleasure. And my thought was, I feel his pleasure at IGE. Why would I go do something that I don't know if I'm going to feel his pleasure? Game over. As soon as I got back into our own country, touchdown at SFO, San Francisco, I called him and said, I can't do this. The guy's not a Christian. He knows who I am. And he says, how can I not support you? I'm not saying I'm perfect by any stretch of the imagination. I am saying if you're desperate enough to seek truth as you break that water like you need oxygen, he'll be there and he'll speak to it. Even a guy like me who is so lousy at the spiritual disciplines. And you know, all those things, all those tangible successes and the cover story of Christianity Today, every evangelical leader's dream, even though I've made fun of Christianity Today all my life, it all happens after that. I can't explain it except that I was trying my best and something worked out. So God is a gradualist. That's my takeaway. God is a gradualist, and he will beat you over the head with a 2x4, and sometimes he'll just give you the body blow if you need it. But you got to get away. And sometimes it means getting away from your own experiences and your own people. Go to the mountaintop and be solitary. Otherwise, you might be tempted by this world when it's not your time to be tempted by the world. You still have something to do. Make time to be in relationships with accountability, but get away from them and have some time alone. And this is all the more remarkable in terms of the call, in terms of the people beating you over the head in my own experience, because I know you may find this hard to believe, but just trust me. I'm an introvert. My first love is books. I'm not an academic, as Bob keeps using a pejorative phrase, Bob Roberts. I like reading. I would rather be away from people. My sister used to push me out into the playground when we were little to get on that little, whatever they're called, merry-go-rounds. My mother, who is a saint and the softest person in the world, realized this. And you know what she did to me? She said, you're going to go play soccer, and she dropped me off and then drove away as a 6-year-old. I mean, this was traumatizing to me. Do you know soccer is the thing through which I relate to every culture in the world now? And because I played it and had some success, I got recruited by Stanford. That wouldn't have been my mom exercised some leadership in that household and said, hey, buddy, you're doing something and you're going to learn some team sports and this is what it looks like. It could have been basketball. It could have been baseball. It's interesting how God works. He is and will work with you if you're willing to work with him. The thing that I would say, though, is if you think according to your station in life, if you think according to where you were born or whatever your profile is, there you will stay. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but if God's the focus and if you allow God to be bigger than your imagination, he'll teach you how to be an extrovert. He'll teach you to engage other cultures. He'll provide folks along the way. But if you stay hunkered down and it sucks to be me, woe is me, and it's all about you because you're complaining the whole time, you'll stay right there. You'll still go to heaven. Your life won't be all that much fun. But hey, you're still going to heaven. That's a pretty good deal. But let God be bigger than your imagination, because you know him. You know that he doesn't need you because he longs for you to come alongside, and as a result, you're in a position to know yourself and therefore answer a call when it comes. Okay. The last part of this discussion is if you have all these things, what is your theology, or how does your theology touch the ground? If you have this theology of leadership, what does it look like in practice? We had the question yesterday, what's the how part? I'm going to share with you what the how looks like for me, how I think about the how. Again, this is not prescriptive. This is not saying that you should do this. But you need to think about what your philosophy, theology of leadership is, and then how it actually gets exercised, how it gets implemented. And if you go to your reader, there's a one-pager that says My Philosophy of Leadership. That's my summary of what I'm about to talk about. So there's no need to take notes, and you can just listen or fall asleep, whatever suits you. But I think there's 6 parts, if I got it right. There's accountability, vision, mission, administration, and we're going to spend some time on administration because it's more than what you think. And then decision-making and presentation. Don't get scared. 6 points, that's going to go on forever. I'll be quick, but I do want you to see them in relationship to one another, against the backdrop of what we just discussed, rooted in the scripture of John 6. Accountability, I've said this a million times, we're not going to spend a whole lot of time here. If you're not anchored in your internal life, it doesn't matter what you do tangibly. You'll be a menace. Don't be. The way you handle that is you pray. You pray for wisdom, you pray for knowledge, you pray for understanding, you pray for the capacity to listen and to observe and therefore to learn. If you're in that constant prayer every day, every morning, you're going to be in good shape. And if you're having these discussions with folks that you trust, you're going to be in good shape. Folks that will love you so much that they tell you the truth. If there's no excellence in the internal life, it will not manifest itself externally. That's all I'm going to say there. Vision. A leader's got to have a vision. What does a vision look like? Let me give you one definition of it. If it works, use it. A vision is the envisioned end state. Importantly, it's not the end date. A date is something that we define. A vision is what does it really look like when we're all is said and done. The envisioned end state, it never changes. It's a compelling and simple statement that should motivate, engender passion, and provide purpose toward a better world. This is, again, for secular audiences, but you know what I mean by all those things from the Christian side. It guides in the absence of leaders and forms the foundation for a unified but diverse culture. In a very decentralized, in an organization that is decentralized in its execution, which any organization has to be if it's going to survive in the globalized age, what is it that unites the decentralized execution of the mission? It's got to be a common culture. It has to be a common culture. It has to be terms of reference. Now, the good news for the body of Christ, our common culture is with Jesus at the center. And there's a lot of things that happen despite everything that we do because Jesus is at the center. But we can be a little bit better in terms of how we create the culture. A culture with a bias toward action based on thinking. A think and do culture for whatever the mission of your organization is. You got to have a vision. A mission, which we'll talk about, is how you accomplish that vision. You have a strategy for implementing your mission. A strategy has, or a mission has milestones, dates, those kinds of things, but it all serves, the strategy will change, the vision never changes. Let me give you an example. We were talking, sitting around the boardroom meeting, smoking and joking at Wycliffe, just joking, and I won't say anything. But we're talking about vision and mission. We spent, as an ad hoc committee, 18 months on vision and mission. That's probably a little too long in thinking it through. But on the other hand, we put a lot of time into it. And you know, one day it just occurred to us that Vision 2025 was the mission statement. It's not the vision statement. Whew. Think about that. Vision 2025 is to have a project started in the remaining 2,200 people groups by the year 2025. Well, let's just say we get to 2025 and we've done that. Has the purpose for Wycliffe's existence been accomplished? The answer is no. We want to see every people group with it in a language, in accessible scripture that's accessible to them, which is to say a colloquial form of the language that they have in their hands. That's not going to be done by 2025. So the vision is very different. We want to provide the gospel and the language heart to everybody. A heart, how do we say it? language of the heart, one that speaks to their heart as soon as possible. I'd like to do it before 2025. But that's the vision of the organization. When we do that, we should shut our doors. Because if we've done that, then we've also raised up leaders in those contexts who can make the edits and make it more contemporary, and then have, the mass proliferation of Bibles that we have in the English language. Which is fine. Good news, message, whatever. I think that's good. But there's a lot of people who don't have it. So vision and mission. Vision never changes. It's why you exist. If it doesn't relate to the vision, you shouldn't be doing it. If the vision exists, then you don't need to be existing as an organization. That's simple. The vision recognizes the void, it mobilizes the people, it channelizes. It's the point of reference for which all that you do. It's the foundation of your culture. You should measure everything that you do against that vision statement. Does this fit? It should be right there on your computer screen or above it. Strategy. What is strategy? Strategy is something that you develop to accomplish your vision. Here's one definition, and it's, to my mind, the best I've ever heard. It comes from John Lewis Gaddis and his book on the strategies of containment, published by Oxford in 1982, a book I'm sure you've all read. And here it is on page 8 of the introduction. A strategy is the process by which ends are related to means, intentions to capabilities, objectives to resources. The process by which ends are related to means, intentions to capabilities, objectives to resources. I want to give you a couple other perspectives on this. And this is, I know you're going to think I'm crazy, but this is how I learn and think about things. This is another quote from a French general, therefore not all that inclined towards religion, wondering why the French got defeated in Vietnam and Algeria. The best lessons come from defeats, I think, from suffering, because successes, we're just convinced how right we are. Here's how he defines strategy. And I want you to hear this as a guy from his context saying it, but then I also want you to hear it at the same time as a member of the body of Christ, because you substitute a few words, and this is a pretty good method for living the way. His name is Andre Beaufret. Strategy cannot be a single defined doctrine. It is a method of thought, the objects of which is to codify events, set them in order of priority, and then choose the most effective course of action. If my way is to see everything in life as an opportunity to love, I'm going to be okay with the interruptions that come to my business and to my work life, as opposed to getting the next thing done on the checklist. It prioritizes. Here's what else he said. But strategy is no more than a means to an end. It is for policy to lay down the aims to achieve a strategy, and policy is governed basically by the philosophy which we wish to see prevail. The destiny of the human race depends on the philosophy which it chooses and upon the strategy by which it tries to ensure that philosophy shall prevail. We want to see everybody come into the kingdom, those not included. And if our methodology and our ideology gets in the way, guess what? We better throw them out. Strategy is not a plan. Strategy is an interactive process. We in America love the plan. One of Bismarck's generals, the elder, von Moltke the elder, plans never survive contact with the enemy. This is the German-Prussian general who united Germany against the Danes and the French and the Austrians. Ephesians 6. You're at war, baby. You may not like my martial analogies, and there's folks who come from the Mennonite pacifist tradition that say, man, you just talk too military. Well, I'm sorry for that, and it's true. But we are also engaged in a campaign against the enemy, and we are under attack, whether you like it or not. Read Daniel 10. Hey, I would have been with you sooner, but I was detained by the evil prince. You got to think about strategy, and you have to realize that your plan is going to come under attack. If your plan doesn't come under attack, I'd say you're irrelevant. Welcome the challenges. Welcome the obstacles that Satan will throw in your way. because that means you're a threat to him. You are the church, and you're anchored in eternity across time and space with banners terrible unfurled. Plans are easy to fall in love with. Let me give you another story from my past. If you don't know it, at Camp Fuji, or at Fujisan, the great example of illustration of Japan, there's a Marine Corps base there. And there's not a whole lot of trees on Fujisan, especially around the bottom areas. It's all grasslands, actually. But because of the runoff from the mountain, there's all these deep wadis, or little valleys. And so you're walking across these grass things. It's great for infiltration because you have cover. But you can literally be walking, and then there'll be a 30-foot drop-off because you'll walk into one of the wadis where the water came off the top of the mountain. So the plan for the night was we were called to take an objective. It was a night attack, and we were called to take this objective. And because of the way that my elders had been taught, which is to say the commander of the battalion, we were going to do it the way he was taught, which is before night vision goggles existed and before he evidently did a survey of the land that we were supposed to cross. And so what you do, according to the textbooks from the 50s and 60s in the Marine Corps, if you're going to do a night attack, you get online. And why do you do that? It makes sense. This is Civil War mentality. But you don't want to lose each other. So you literally lock arms. And so you're aware of who's on your left and your right. And then when the time to come goes, you say the password because everybody's in brief beforehand. You know, apple, orange, whatever. The geese fly at midnight, you know, whatever goes down. And so I'm just thinking, this is just insane. And I say it, and they go, no, you're going to do it because it's the plan. You think about why World War I happened, and you can understand. People trying to follow orders according to the best of what they've been taught, when what they've been taught is totally irrelevant. And so we start off, sure enough, we're all happy-go-lucky, we're implementing the plan, they have night vision goggles, they can mow us down, but we're walking. And then all of a sudden you start hearing screams. Ah! Poof. You got people falling down these 30-foot cliffs, and boom, boom, boom. Nobody got hurt, there's a lot of sprained ankles, but it will always be what I call, it always illustrates no FTP in my mind. Don't force the plan. Think about what you're doing before you go. Think about it before you go. I was on the border of Mexico and western Texas doing a thing with counter-drug stuff when I first joined the Marine Corps. And we were trying to think through the schedule for the day. And I'll never forget this, too, in terms of the way people have been trained and educated with the best of intentions. And I think some of us have probably experienced this in evangelical organizations as well. And so there's got to be a daily plan and daily schedule. And the way I think and the way we had been trained, because this whole new educational model had come into the Marine Corps just as I had become a second lieutenant. I didn't realize this, but it fit exactly with how I thought, so I thought this was normal. So this guy who was my captain thought totally differently than me. So we're all thinking about what we're going to do, and my feeling is, hey, what are the objectives for the day? 1, 2, 3. Bam. And then he goes, okay, that's great. He's trying to encourage his subordinates, disciple, develop, whatever. And then he goes back to the schedule and he says, what about 1500? What about 3 p.m.? What goes in the 3 p.m. slot? And he literally, his face began to quiver and sweat because he had to report to his major, who thought like him, who reported to his lieutenant colonel. We got to be doing something during the workday. The calendar says it. The schedule says it. What are we going to do at 3 p.m.? Sir, if we get this done, and it's done by 2 p.m., these 3 objectives, let them go. Cut them loose. You'll build popularity, and people will respect you because these were the objectives for the day. We did those 3 things all day. Whatever you do, it'll take all your time. So that's strategy. There's a whole bunch of things that you can think about when you think about it. What are the needs? What are the gaps? What's the value added that you bring as an organization? Who are your partners? Don't partner, as Paul is saying, just to partner. Oh, we need to partner. What about 3 p.m.? Well, we got to find a partner. You know? Ridiculous. Okay. What's the plan for getting there? What are the short-term goals? What are the long-term goals? What are the quantitative and qualitative metrics that measure those goals in the short term? And you got to ask both questions. We Americans love quantitative goals. It's easier. It is intellectually lazy and morally irresponsible to ignore the qualitative side. Success takes different things. We're in Pakistan in the Northwest Frontier Province holding the first conference in the province's history on religion and peace and how minority faith communities contribute to social stability. And we had the Shia, the Sikh, and the Hindu and the Christian speaking to 40 imams and student leaders, 40 imams, and then about 100 student leaders from throughout the province. This is where Al-Qaeda and the Taliban were founded, in Peshawar. It was the first time that the minority communities were able to talk about their faith. You know what the metric for success was there? I didn't know it going in, but I knew it coming out, is that each minority faith member took twice as podium time. And it didn't occur to me until afterwards that they were so grateful for the opportunity to explain to their fellow Pakistanis how their faith contributed to this civil society. They had never been given the opportunity. And so they live in fear of the majority. Metrics are strange. Qualitative metrics are stranger. Be looking for them and don't get reduced to quantitative stuff. Strategy at the end of the day reduces the step of faith. Don't let it eliminate the step of faith. You still got to be Indiana Jones and you got to find the Temple of Doom. But the time is going to come when you got to cross that chasm and expect the bridge to appear. If anybody's seen that movie. Another important trilogy in the history of Americana. And he's coming back. All right. All right, we're going to conclude in the last 15 minutes here, focus on administration. And I'm going to spend a little bit of time on decision-making and presentation, and then you're done with me. I take administration very seriously. Admin, it is a metaphysical experience for me. It is a theological experience. It is a spiritual experience for me. And I never would have said that before I joined the Marine Corps. I got the bass-ackwards compliment of becoming the executive assistant to the battalion commander. Battalion commander has 1,000 men under him, and I had to run all of the, you want to know what hell looks like? I had to run all of the personal files of 1,000 men. I mean, I had guys working for me, don't get me wrong. But and I was the legal officer. In 29 Palms, the high desert in eastern Los Angeles, in the Mojave Desert, is one of the methamphetamine capitals of the world. So we had guys who were doing drugs all the time, and I was running urinalysis at all crazy hours trying to catch them, and there was zero tolerance, and I'm sending a lot of good people to jail for making a silly mistake. But when you send people to jail, you better have your T's crossed and your I's dotted. I hated that experience. 18 months. But I learned from that experience that good administration is what separates the good from the excellent. Let me say that again. Good administration separates the good from the excellent. You're just another organization if you don't execute well. And we don't need just another mediocre organization these days. We need excellence. It's kind of like playing defense in soccer. You're never appreciated. But when you make a mistake, everybody knows who you are. But as a leader, you need to encourage a culture of good administration. Because if you, again, this is where it becomes theological for me. My whole theology can be reduced to one saying from Jesus. Let your yes be yes and your no be no. Excellence, accountability, integrity, product, everything flows from that simple thing. And we sometimes don't think about it as a yes. It's not that big a deal. Hey, I'll get that back to you tomorrow. And then you don't. Is your yes, yes, or your no, no? Letting that yes be yes and no be no, that's a way of showing respect to your neighbor. It's a way of loving your neighbor. It's a way of showing common courtesy. And I would also say this in your own self-interest. Your credibility is either going up or it's going down. So which is it going to be? Now you may think that's anal retentive. And it is. But you need to think about those things. And if your yes is going to become a no, take the time to tell somebody. People will respect that. People are full of grace. They'll give you a mile if you're asking for an inch, especially if you have a reputation for excellence. Give it to them. I would also say this, too, in terms of being a leader. And this is also scriptural. Matthew 25 and the talents. I have something, I call it this, other people call it different things, but through administration, you exercise what I call the trust tether. If I can trust you with the little things, if I can trust you with the 1 or 2 talents, I'm going to trust you with more. Talents, literally, money. Talents, passions, and skills. If I have to follow up and say, did you do this when you said you're going to do it and you didn't do it? Credibility goes down, trust goes down. Hey, there's more opportunity for discipleship. But you shouldn't be making the same mistakes twice. That's not excellence. That's not honoring your neighbor. If your yes is your yes and you get back on the little things, then I know you're going to get back on the big things. And you need to hold people accountable to those kinds of things. Let me give you an example from my own life, from a different model. I went to Stanford, which lost to UCLA, and I'll never forget this. I had a professor who gave me back a paper. I put a lot of work into it. And he turned it over and he'd written this whole page. And you know, being delusional and self-referential, type A, kumbaya cocoon Christian that I am, I thought, man, there's a lot of compliments coming. Yeah, giddy up. And it's not like it's indelible. Well, it is indelible, but it's not a scar. The first line was, your writing is so tortuous and convoluted that I cannot follow it. Every time somebody comes up to me and says, you know, I really enjoyed what you have on your website, I think about that. Now, did he come at me and did he do that in front of the class? Did he shame me in any way? Did he mean it with ill intent? Did it come from a context of a teacher, and therefore a leader? Did it come from someone that I respected as someone who had excellence and lived it? It did. And it was from that day that I started getting better as a writer, because I didn't think, before I thought I was okay. You got to be willing to say those things and listen to those things. That's good administration. When you sign a letter, there's 4 spaces, not 3, between the warmly in Christ and your name. If it's 3, it's going back. It's that simple. Because when that thing goes out, that's your name, literally. It's your reputation as an organization. And if a leader does one thing, he or she stewards the reputation of his or her organization. And is that reputation excellence? Or is it something less than excellent? Is it something less than the call to be Christ-like? To use the passions and skills for his purposes, to build his kingdom because you're in a right relationship with him. That said, administration is also useful. It does 3 important things. It makes the organization look good. Do you answer the phone within 3 times of the 3 rings? That's a rule in our organization. We don't always practice it, but it's a rule. Our phone calls returned. Our donor letters, thank yous to gifts sent out within the week. I've been blowing that one big time, and Lucy's kicking my butt. Oh, there's 2 more? Well, the good news is good, but I got to write another letter. Well, that's a blessing to write another letter. And thank you, Lucy, for reminding me. Because you get so caught up on the internal. It makes their organization look good. It increases their credibility. It creates a record administration does. It allows for lessons learned through that record, and it also keeps your partners accountable. One thing that we do all the time with all the people that we work with is that we will send a quick MFR back to them, memo for the record. And we do it with grace and courtesy, and allows them to participate in that, how that meeting is remembered. We've never worked with another organization that does that. But you know what? You send it to them, you say, hey, this is what we understand the conversation to be. We understand this to be the takeaways. Any input? And 99% of the time they say, thanks for doing that, no input, and they're off. I'd say 70% of the time those MFRs come back and said, this is what we agreed to. Because time change, everybody starts, the heart is deceitful, Jeremiah 17:9, and even good people will say, I didn't really say that, I didn't really mean that. Well, here's the email that said you agreed with this summary of it. It's not a gotcha game. It's an accountability game. And it's a time stewardship game. And then the last thing that administration does is it frees if it's good admin and good staff, you enable the decision maker, your boss, to do just that. To make a decision. He or she should not be asking you, well, what about this, that, and the other? Maybe that's in the preliminary stages and it's part of the discipleship. But once you know the culture of that organization, your job is to go your decision maker and let it be a yes or a no, and you're moving because you're the expert and you're employing your boss. You know your portfolio better than he does or she does. And if they're good, they're going to let you run because they trust you, because that trust tether goes all the way out the door and across the world. They don't need to hear from you. So good admin is important. And in the last 2 minutes that we have here, let me just say this about decision making and presentation. Decision making, if you're a leader and you make a decision, you're going to create conflict. You can work towards consensus, and hopefully you've got a culture where everybody's seeing the same thing, but you're going to create conflict. Be ready for that. You can preempt and discern and understand how people are going to react beforehand. Maybe you pull people aside, but be ready for it, and the time comes when it's just got to say, yeah, we're moving out. And you're with us or you're against us. You've got to have discernment in this process, because some people are going to whine before or after or not. Some people are going to need a shoulder to cry on according to that day, their personal life, or according to something bad that's happened previous professionally. Some people are going to need a kick in the butt. Say, suck it up. This is what we're doing. But it calls for discernment. Jesus was discerning. How does Jesus say in the Scriptures, if you're not against us, you're for us? And if you're not for me, you're against me. That's Matthew 12:30 and Mark 9:40. In the first case, if you're not for me, you're against me, he's talking to the Pharisees who have a hard heart. His message changes according to the audience. Mark 9:40, if you're not for us, you're against us. If you're not against us, you're for us. That's the disciples coming back to Jesus saying, hey, everybody's using your name. What about that? I thought we only got to use your name, since we displayed it so well once we came off the mountaintop in John 6. If they're using my name, that's okay, let them go. Decision-making is about applying the principles that we've been talking about today. You have to have discernment, you have to be ready for conflict, and you have to be comfortable with it. The last thing is presentation, and this is its own class. How do you interact with the context? Presentation is the personal encounter, it's public speaking. You need to think about, what is the image that I present? And this may be anal-retentive, but my feeling is there's only one chance for a first impression. Your reputation begins from that first personal encounter. What is it? Are you at a party, and Christian or otherwise, or in D.C. this happens all the time, drives me crazy. Are you at a party and you're talking to somebody and you're always looking over their shoulder? Who else can I meet? I got to give my card to that guy. Man, that annoys me. If you're treating somebody as the child of God that person is and they have dignity, look them in the eye. Give them the time of day. They may not be the person that you think you need right now. But you know what? I've seen God surprise me so many times when I thought, man, I got to get out of this conversation. That person comes back. Usually because I say that, probably. I think that's just God reminding me. In your presentation of your leadership style, I will just say this. There's one thing that does not work. It's leadership by lapel, which is to say you lead because of the rank that you have. If you're doing that, that's a superficial leadership, and it will fail every time. Lead because of who you are. And do not lead because you think you need to be like your boss. You think you need to be like Bob Roberts. Well, wait a minute. And you think you need to be like Catherine or any of the diverse Pastor James. Everything that you've seen in this library of leaders that we presented to you. Lead because of who you are, because you've thought about having a leadership style that is rooted in Scripture. And be aware of this, which goes back to Caleb and Joshua. If you allow yourself to be perceived as the way you think you are, and it's not a good impression, that will be conveyed. People want to work with leaders who are humble but confident. Numbers 13:32, the spies come back from the land, and then we saw the Anakites, and to ourselves we seemed like grasshoppers, and so we seemed to them. Wow. They just took one asymmetry, or asymmetry as Doug Johnson said, I didn't know how to read that, asymmetry, and turned it into a double asymmetry, and now they're totally irrelevant. They see us as grasshoppers, and you know what, doggone it, I feel like a grasshopper. And therefore, I'm not going to claim the promise of God. And therefore, for those 40 days of tangible proof, we're going to walk around for 40 years, and Joshua's still going to be a nice guy because he's focused on meditating on the law and an internal life.